Given normal conditions, there are two characteristics all children share that you don't have to teach them. What are these two characteristics and what's their possible connection to the Christian faith? Stay tuned. We're going to talk about this and a whole lot more in today's episode.
If your desire is to become spiritually stronger, emotionally healthier, and relationally smarter, you're at the right place. Speaker and writer Stephanie Smith inspires and equips you to achieve these three key aims. If you're a parent, you'll also learn how to raise empowered kids, ready for adulthood. Let's get started.
Welcome back. I'm delighted that you are here. Hey, if you haven't already, make sure to go to the website, stephaniepresents.com, and sign up for High Impact. It is a weekly newsletter that helps you to fulfill your mission to be spiritually strong, emotionally healthy, and relationally smart. And why do that? Because you have an impact that is immeasurable, eternal, and irreplaceable. And God wants you to participate fully in the grand story that He has, not just for the world, but for your life. All right, what are the two characteristics that all children under normal conditions share, and what possible importance do they have to this mission? Well, those two characteristics are laughter and play. You know, in healthy children development, no one has to teach a child to laugh, and no one has to teach a child to play. Definitely as kids get older, if they have not had a really healthy environment and they have been allowed to be so entertained by outside activities and everything that they lose the ability to have imaginative play. But that is not what happens under normal, healthy conditions. You have to teach a child to share. You have to teach a child to read. You have to teach a child how to put on their shoes and their clothes and brush their teeth and all kinds of other things. But you never have to teach a child to laugh or to play. What in the world is the significance of that to the Christian faith? You know, I wonder if perhaps it is in laughter and play when we come the closest to being to sharing the likeness of God's image. I suspect there is something in those early years of childhood when children cannot get enough play and they cannot get enough laughter, that there is a message that God is sending to us to say, hey, this perhaps represents the state of how life is supposed to be more than anything else. But you know what? As we get older, what tends to happen? Our laughter tends to become less, and our play that is healthy also tends to become less. And I think there's something that we lose in that. You know, in our Tuesday episodes, we've been tracking along through the book of Nehemiah. And in this last episode, I talked about joy and how when the people were confronted with the Old Testament law that they did not know, the scrolls had been lost and they'd been rediscovered during the rebuilding of these walls, and how when people were hearing for the first time what was required of them and what God was asking of them in order to have a right relationship with Him, their initial response was grief, it was sadness, it was weeping. And the leaders stopped and said, no, that's not the right response at this time. There is a time for grief and weeping and repentance, but this is a time actually for joy and for feasting. And that's what they said. Go home. Have a feast. Make sure that you look around for other people who are around you, that they have enough. But this is a time for great joy because now you know what is being required of you. Now you have a path back to restoration with God. This is a time for joy. And there's a statement that is made in Nehemiah chapter 8, and it is, the joy of the Lord is our strength. What does this have to do with raising kids? Well, in human development, we tend to seek to recreate or to find as adults what we have experienced, what's been familiar to us as children. Notice I said familiar. That is not the same thing as healthy. We do not default to seeking healthy environments and relationships as adults. We will default to what is familiar to us. And this is one of the reasons that the work of going back and looking at your origin story, it's not for the purpose of blaming, it's for the purpose of understanding so that you can become aware of what was familiar to you that you want to hold on to that was good? And what was familiar to you that you need to say, oh, you know what? That was not so good. Or maybe that was just downright awful. And you can do something about it. You can be the one who changes that for yourself and for your family. I heard this statement recently and I liked it. It said, this ran in our family until it ran into me. And it's a statement about being able to see traits and trends that happen in our families and behaviors that repeat themselves until somebody makes a choice, probably a lot of choices, and things change, not just for them, but for future generations. Well, children who grow up in environments of joy grow up with an inherent strength that they may not even recognize. And the parents may not even recognize that this environment of joy is actually building strong kids. Conversely, children who do not grow up in an environment of joy, even if they are growing up in faithful Christian homes, will not be as strong. There will be weaknesses and vulnerabilities that they have because joy is not something that is a familiar environment to them. Now, if you happen to be listening to this and your children are older, or maybe they are grown and you are an empty nester, it is never too late to start changing the environment in your life and in your home. So don't listen to any of this and start feeling shame. The point of this is not to be shamed, just like the point of the people in Nehemiah's time when they started hearing, oh, these were the things that they needed to have been doing that they weren't doing. And when they responded that way, initially with such grief, and it was like, no, that's not the right response to this. So the response to what I'm sharing here today is not to heap shame and it's not to walk away and to be grieved. It is rather to say, aha, here is something that I can implement in my life, whether my children are very young, maybe you don't even have children yet, but you're just thinking ahead and planning ahead and you're gathering information and knowledge, or your children are older or they're grown and you realize, oh, this was something that didn't go well in your home and it's something that you want to change. When we exercise, our body requires more oxygen to be converted to glucose. And to make this possible, our breathing and our heart rate increase, and that's what delivers more oxygen to our muscles. And when we do this over a period of time, this exertion also makes our hearts and lungs stronger. In a similar way, joy is oxygen to our Christianity. It's oxygen to our faith. It's what gives us strength. One measure of strength is adaptability and flexibility. It's resilience. Incredibly tall buildings are designed so that they will move with the winds. Even tall trees, these huge, massive trees, they are not entirely rigid. They will move. And this is what allows those buildings and those trees to not break. If you build a building that has no adaptability, no flexibility, there's no allowance for movement in storms or in winds, that's the building that will break. Well, joy builds a kind of strength that creates a resiliency strength, and this is very powerful for our kids. Galatians 5:22 through 23 records, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. It's fascinating that the second item in that list is joy. And when we look at that list, most of those items we can easily tend to tie to actions. When we think of love, for example, we may think of an emotional feeling, but we're probably also going to think of some actions of how love gets lived out. When it comes to patience, we can see that in someone's response and in their actions. When we think of kindness, we tend to associate that with actions. The same thing for goodness, faithfulness, even gentleness, and definitely self-control. But there are two items on this list that are a little hard to tie to an action. One is joy, and the other is peace. These are more about environment than action. Now, definitely there are actions that we can take or not take that will lead to or decrease joy and peace. But these are more about attitude. They're more about environment than they are just a specific action. A person can have an action of kindness, for example, and yet at the same time that you can have the act of kindness, that doesn't necessarily mean that you are a person of joy. Have you ever experienced being on the receiving end of someone's act of self-control, and yet you didn't feel like there was a whole lot of peace or joy involved in that? Well, I think that as we look at this list, these are the types of things that we want to be intentional to build in our children. And it's not just about the actions, it's also about what's the environment we're creating. We rightly give intentional thought to the education that our children receive, what kind of knowledge that they acquire. And we need to do that. We also rightly give priority and intentionality to the activities that our kids engage in, as we should. But it is also incredibly important that we pay attention just as much to the environment that our children are exposed to and that they grow up in. This is primarily true for our homes, but it's also something to be mindful of in the activities and places where our children also spend their time. If they attend a school, if they're involved in a church, and this isn't just true when they're little, this is true throughout all of their growing up years. If they have caretakers, if they are part of programs that they attend regularly, pay attention to the environment that's going on there, because it's not just about the knowledge and it's not just about the activities or the skill sets. The environment also makes a tremendous difference. Think of it as a triangle, and you need all three of those in order to create a whole heart. And we need all three of those in order to create a whole human being. It seems in human nature that we have this tendency to go from one side of the pendulum to the other extreme. And throughout a good bit of Christian history, what we have seen is an extreme of movements that were so rooted in legalism. It was as if joy was a sin, as if the more holy you were and the more righteous you were, then the less joy that you would have, which I don't know how that happened and how that came to be, especially in light of verses like Galatians 5:22 through 23, which clearly says joy is evidence of the fruit of the Spirit at work in our lives. But that's something that we've seen. And then the pendulum kind of swung to the other extreme, and we had phrases that on the face of it sounded good, but sometimes the application of that actually became its own form of destruction, where we would hear things like, well, it's not about religion, it's all about relationship. Okay, I get that to a point, but when that becomes an excuse to not do the hard work of creating character and paying attention to the fact that, God actually does kind of have some rules that he has set out for us, not just in the Old Testament, and those rules which no longer apply because they were there just for civil and ceremonial purposes. But the moral laws are timeless. Those didn't come down from Moses; those came down from the very beginning in the Garden of Eden. And those moral laws apply to all people for all time. God is also a God of rules. He is both relationship and rules. And as we raise our children, yes, we want to have rules. They need to have rules. They will not raise themselves to be healthy adults. That's naive at best and it's lazy at worst. But also, we want to have this relationship, and part of this relationship wants to be joy. Who wants to be around people that you don't feel enjoy you? Nobody wants to do that. Why would your children want to be around a God that they don't associate with joy? If your Christianity is so much about knowledge and activities, if it is so much about outward behavior, if it's so much about learning the right thing, but your children don't see you just as a person being a person of joy, well, they're not going to make a distinction between you as a person and you and your faith. And it just kind of is going to carry over and to think, well, why would I want to have this kind of a faith? I mean, I'm kind of around this environment that's it's not joyful. There's no laughter. There's no play that goes on here. And again, what our children get used to is what they will seek to create or to find for themselves just by default. If your kids get used to eating junk food, I mean, that's what they want more of, right? In the same way, if we get them used to kind of junk environments, and I don't mean just in the extremes. I'm not just talking about growing up in abusive situations. I'm just talking about things that we might consider to be more middle of the road, where they're growing up in environments with high stress, anxiety, boredom, harshness, shame, criticism, anger, hostility, maybe just even kind of indifference, apathy, praise that's always performance based. All of these kinds of environmental factors are the things that they will seek to find or create as adults. Do you have a home of curiosity? That's an environmental factor. If you have a home of conversation and discussion and seeking to find and learn new things and to have new experiences and to have a home of hospitality, those are environmental forces that have a profound impact on how your children not just grow up, but the lifestyles that they will seek to create for themselves as adults. For myself, one of the things that I've realized years ago is that joy for me was something I tended to treat more like a cupcake. It was like a treat to be indulged in occasionally. But what I came to see is it's a little bit more like a catapult. Okay, I understand catapults are military weapons that are long out of use. I don't think they're going to be coming back anytime soon, probably never. But if you don't know about a catapult, those were mighty weapons that were capable of and responsible for bringing down immense fortresses throughout significant parts of human history. And in the same way, our joy is this powerful force. It's not just a treat to be indulged in. And so creating an environment of joy is something like all things of value. It's going to come at a cost. It's got to be purchased. So what does it cost us? It costs us choosing to do the work of cultivating our character for the purpose of engaging fully in God's grand story. It's not just that we develop character for character's sake, so we can, check off our boxes either on a sheet of paper or just inside our own heads and go, well, look at me, look how much I've grown here. Or even for our kids, it's character so that we can be part of God's redemptive, restorative, and resurrection stories that get lived out in the lives of individuals. So we have these fruits of the Spirit. And as we engage with these and we choose to do the work of these, this is what will build joy into our lives. Choosing to have an attitude and a practice of gratitude instead of complaining. Believing the best instead of just assuming the worst. It's choosing grace over payback. It's choosing to be patient and present instead of just rushed and too busy for anybody else. It's all these choices and more that get lived out with faithfulness, just showing up every day over and over again and choosing to have an attitude of joy. Now, in the last episode, I talked about the fact that the people were told to go home and celebrate. I mean, in very real, tangible ways. It wasn't just that they were told, go home and be joyful. I mean, that joy found a practical, tangible, physical expression. And in the same way, I would encourage you to think of ways that you can find tangible, practical expressions of joy in your family, with your kids as individuals, and with your family as a whole. Make time for laughter. Make time for play. You know, when my kids were growing up, they loved ice cream and they wanted to have ice cream every single night. Well, this wasn't just like a scoop of ice cream. I mean, they were notorious for their appetites. And so eventually what I did was I just designated one night of a week as ice cream night. And with 5 sons, we didn't just go through half a carton of ice cream. I mean, we could go through 2 or 3 cartons of ice cream in a night's setting. But it kept them from asking every single night for ice cream. And it gave them this one night to really look forward to. And then they could pretty much have all the ice cream that they wanted. And their bowls were filled to overflowing. You know, even simple things like that just create these habits of joy in your children's life and in your family's life. You can be intentional about looking for simple ways appropriate to their ages, appropriate to your family's lifestyle. But make no mistake, you can pack your kids' head with all kinds of knowledge about the Bible, about God, about algebra, about everything else on the planet. You can have them engaged in all kinds of activities where they are developing skill sets and social relationships, but the environment that they are growing up in will have a profound impact, not just on how they grow up, but on the lives that they seek to create or find for themselves and their families when they become adults. So prioritize creating an environment of joy, because that is absolutely a way that you will build strong kids. All right, my friend, thank you so much for being here. Look forward to being back with you next time. In the meantime, if you haven't already, sign up for High Impact, the weekly newsletter at stephaniepresents.com. And hey, would you leave a rating and a review? That feedback is very helpful for me, and it also helps the algorithms that be to make sure that other people get to know about this podcast as well. All right, remember this, my friend. You have an impact that is immeasurable, eternal, and irreplaceable. I'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening. Visit the website, stephaniepresents.com, and sign up for High Impact to join the mission of building spiritually strong, emotionally healthy, and relationally smart women and families. You can also book Stephanie to speak at your event and check out additional resources. Together, we can invite and equip generations to engage fully in God's grand story.